Good evening, good evening. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna share this to my personal page so that everyone has a chance to see. Coming to you live from my Facebook page, South Shore Audio. I'm gonna share that. So I'm gonna say share. Come join me. All right. So I've shared that. Good evening, good evening, good evening. All right. So I'm going to get started. I have a short talk for you tonight, but I want to continue with the series that I started last night. And I'm going to be keep. That's not very good grammar. I'm going to be going on with this series of talking about home studio, building your first home studio. And so before we jump into this evening's topic, I do want to tell you that in the link of this live video's description, I have a guide that I put together where I've gone and I've researched all the essential things that you need to build your first home studio on any budget. So whether you're low budget, $500 is your max, whether you've got more than that to spend all the way up to $2,000, I've got some recommendations for you on exactly the products that I recommend you buy and where to buy them, which we touched on yesterday evening. But to briefly recap, reverb.com or sweetwater.com. Take your pick. Reverb for used is that's where I would go if you want used and you're willing to have some trade-offs for a better price. Sweetwater, you get a lot more add-ins with your purchase for choosing to buy new. So whatever you think is worth it to you, I'll leave that calculation up to you. So last night we talked about an audio interface and how that audio interface is the hub and the connection point between by the way, before we jump in, if you're watching and you know someone, there's a good chance you probably know someone who would benefit from hearing this information. I would just ask that you help me out, do me a solid, do me a favor, and just hit the share button. Share this video, and perhaps even tag them if you know that person. Tag them directly, and see what they have to say. If you know someone that is a musician and wants to learn how to record and set up their own home studio, then this could help them. And I've got that guide just for that person, so you can save them. I wanted to save you hours of research. That's why I did it, because I know how tedious that process can be. So. Jumping into the topic, we're going to talk about a DAW. What is a DAW? It is a digital audio workstation. It is, for all intents and purposes, the canvas that you are painting on, if I can use that as a metaphor. It is the place where audio gets printed, recorded, stored, and then gets produced and mixed together. And ultimately, everything happens in there until the point of exporting what's in there to a file that becomes either a high-resolution WAV file or a more compressed MP3 file that you get when you play that CD, put it in the car. If you're over the age of 25 and you remember what it was like to put CDs in the car stereo when they were new. Now it's just all, connect Bluetooth with your smartphone and stuff, but you're still listening to an MP3. So that is what enables us to make music on our computers in today's modern world. So before we had DAWs, digital audio workstations, what we had was big, massive analog consoles that I'm sure you've seen these either in pictures, videos, perhaps represented in a movie at one point or another. And these consoles would be the hub or the go-to place where, that was the place where signal would go into it by plugging in microphones or instruments. The Beatles were famous for a lot of their guitar sounds came about by plugging their guitar straight into the channel of, I think they recorded on Neve consoles. Neve is a British manufacturer and they would just take the input gain on that channel and crank it up, and that gave it a certain kind of characteristic and a distorted tone that is different than a regular guitar amp. So big analog consoles are still around, and they're beautiful and they're gorgeous, and I would love to have one. I don't exactly have room for one because, as you can see, this is very much a home studio. This is just a room in a house. You can see the panels back there. Those are acoustic panels. A little teaser for you for a future topic that we're going to talk about, acoustic treatment. This is a home studio. It would be impossible to fit any kind of analog console in here. But back in the day, that's how they did it. The analog console was the place where signal flowed in and out of, and because there was no digital conversion, digital to audio, analog and analog to digital conversion that had to happen, there was absolutely no need for, not need, but there wasn't any latency. We talked about that last night. There was never any, sorry, let me just navigate away here. There was no latency bebecause there's no conversion. There was no need for conversion. It's just analog to analog, analog out, analog, 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 all the way straight through. And then the actual medium that the music would and the audio would be recorded onto, because the console by itself is not enough to get that sound actually documented. That would then be printed onto a tape deck, and I believe tape was 1/4 inch. Oh boy, I don't remember. I've never used a real tape machine, so I don't know the exact dimensions of it. But I want to say a reel of tape was about 1/4 inch or something. Anyway, it's not important, the exact dimension, but the point is that there was a time when this was the only way. And today we have audio interfaces, and then we have DAWS. That's the place where the material actually gets recorded. So I can name some of the DAWs that are out there for you. So the biggest one, the one that has the biggest market share, is made by a company called Avid, and the software is called Pro Tools. You may have heard this name before if you're in any kind of music recording, or basically if you're a musician and you've ever heard anyone talk about recording or the studio. The name Pro Tools has almost sort of become synonymous with the studio and recording. That is the biggest DAW. It's the most popular, the most famous one. It is kind of known as the professional standard, but it really is just a piece of software. So it's not, there's nothing extra special about it except for the fact that there's just more people that use it and therefore know it. Here's the funny thing, I've never used Pro Tools. I've been in scenarios where other people have been using Pro Tools, and I've been a musician, but from the engineer's perspective, the person who's handling the recording and facilitating that, I've never been a Pro Tools user, never once. And I'm not proud of that necessarily. I have a very neutral feeling about that. It's just software. So Pro Tools is the big one. Another one that's gaining a lot of popularity and picking up a lot of steam is Apple's DAW that they've created. Not recently, but their entry into that. It's called Logic Pro, actually. And if you're a Mac user, you've probably noticed that on your Mac when you first got it, if it wasn't downloaded or installed already, at least part of what's included with the purchase of your Mac is a piece of software called GarageBand. And GarageBand is sort of like a condensed, slightly kind of slimmed down, fewer features, maybe not quite as pro or flexible as Logic Pro. So it's kind of like Logic Pro's younger sibling. But GarageBand is fantastic. It's free. And then there's other big players in the space. There's Ableton Live. There is Cubase is another one. Hans Zimmer uses Cubase. There is PreSonus, a manufacturer of like interfaces and monitors and some other pro audio gear, live sound mixers and stuff. They went out and created a DAW some years back called Studio One. There's FL Studio. I believe that used to be exclusively on PC, but I think you can use that on Mac now. Popular for with electronic music producers and people who use a lot of loops and stuff like that. So if that's your style, or perhaps even DJing, like I could see that being a DAW that's suitable for those types of people. Sonar Cakewalk is another one. Never used that. I've heard this is a much kind of more niche sort of boutique software, but at one time I came across one called Mixbus, I think it was called Harrison Mixbus. It looked really cool. It looked like that DAW was essentially designed with mixing only in mind, and mixing essentially that is its own sort of in-depth discussion. But to briefly summarize what mixing is after material has been recorded and track by track, so you've got all of these raw tracks, multi-tracks we would call them, or stems is another name for it, in your project. The job of a mix engineer, or for you as a home studio person, and for me, our job, just as recording was our job, is to take all of those multi-tracks and mix them together in a very creative, kind of sonic, playful is maybe not the best word, but essentially the end goal is to take all of those and then combine it down into one file at the end, one stereo file. And this process is evolved a lot over the years. There's a lot of creative expression that comes into play now with mixing, but really the purpose of mixing is it's not to take a terrible recording and make it sound good, but really it's to take a good recording and make it that much better by creating the right amount of balance and excitement and tasteful choices for when certain moments should be emphasized. And yeah, essentially I'll just leave it at that. So certain picking and choosing your times when things are to be either I guess I'm having a brain fart, but yeah, suffice it to say, balancing the multi-tracks, balancing them down into one stereo file, that's mixing. So, and that used to be done on a console before we had DAWs. So all that to say is there's that DAW Mixbus was made for that process kind of in mind. Not to say the others aren't made for that, but that sort of segues into the next point here is what makes one DAW different from another, all those DAWs that I listed. So what makes Ableton different from Logic, different from Pro Tools, different from Studio One or Cakewalk or Mixbus or any of these, FL Studio? In the end, nothing, really. Because the DAW does not have any sort of sonic coloration to it whatsoever. There's literally no difference that's of really any consequence anyway. So really the difference comes down to the user experience and the workflow. So my recommendation to you is, number one, when you pick a DAW, commit to that DAW and learn how to use it and like really stick with it and make that like your primary bread and butter DAW. This is not the sort of thing where you just dabble a little bit in one and then jump to the next and then try that one on for size and then jump on to the next one. I don't think that's a good approach. I think that's a waste of time. I used Ableton Live when I got started recording about 7 years ago now. Wow, it's been a while. I picked that one as my first DAW, which was kind of stupid because Ableton is not as intuitive as GarageBand or Logic is, or Pro Tools even. It has its own sort of workflow that's kind of unique and distinct from other DAWs, and that was kind of dumb for me to pick that one. But I knew some people who used it, so I figured if I ever got stuck, I could ask a question. And eventually I learned how to use it, and about 4 years ago, I want to say, I got Logic, and I started using Logic. So now I use both, but lately I've been favoring Logic more. So even now, after 7 years, I really only know how to use 2 DAWs, and that shouldn't matter. A DAW is a DAW, and all I'm doing is just explaining to you the basics of it, what it's there for, what it does, and ultimately my recommendation is to pick a DAW, commit to learning it, stick with that DAW for a long time until you just become like intimate partners with it. Learn the keyboard shortcuts. That saves you a lot of time. You can Google around on that. We're not going to jump in and dive on that at this moment, but a lot of great YouTube tutorials. And lastly, my recommendation of like which DAW to go with. Well, I would just say this. When you buy that Focusrite Scarlett Solo, or if you got a little more and you get the Focusrite, I think it's the 2i2 that has 2 inputs. If you get that one, doesn't really matter. They're all Scarlett series. Then what you're going to get is some bundled in software with that purchase. They're going to give you Pro Tools first, which is a very, very light, very condensed, very limited version of Pro Tools, the full version. I believe they have like limitations on how many tracks you can have, so you can't have unlimited tracks, and probably just a basic suite of plugins that are included. I don't know because I've never used it, but I do know that it is a stripped back version of the full Pro Tools. You'll get that, and you'll get Ableton Live Lite, which same thing, basically a much more essentials, only sort of the elemental version of Ableton. And I don't think I ever used Ableton Live Lite. I think I just, my first interface that I ever bought was one called by Native Instruments, another very prominent company in the world of pro audio and music production. They make some very wonderful software, virtual instruments, just emulation, collections of instruments of all kinds of things, from guitars to world instruments to orchestras and synthesizers and awesome stuff. And my first interface that I ever bought was their model, which at the time was the only one they offered. I think they have 2 now. And they bundled in Cubase. So Cubase is kind of where I started, but I didn't really stick with it. Went to Ableton, purchased the standard version. And then the third choice really is another free choice, GarageBand, if you're a Mac user, which, come on, if you aren't, what's wrong with you? All the PC people just left the chat. So one of those 3, I would say Pro Tools first, Ableton Live Lite, or GarageBand. Those are your 3. They're absolutely free. Why would you not just start with what's free? They work. If you have a Mac, go with GarageBand. The features that are going to be in that are going to be more powerful. It's much closer to being a full-fledged version of a DAW, in my opinion, than Ableton Live Lite or Pro Tools first. So that's what I would do, and that is going to be the next step to putting your first home studio together, is getting your audio interface first and foremost. You've already got your computer and all your gear. We're assuming that. And then getting your DAW set up and running and installed, and getting that connected and communicating with your interface, which on a Mac, I don't know about a PC, I think you have to download drivers, which is still not painful. It's something you can just go to the manufacturer's website and find. But if you're on a Mac, the beauty of it is it's so simple. You just plug that interface right into your computer, and your computer reads it and recognizes it right away. And in your DAW, what you'll do is just open up the preferences menu. Keyboard shortcut for that in every DAW I've ever used is Command, the Command key, and then comma. Otherwise, you can go up to the menu at the top that has the program's name, click on that, go down to Preferences, and then there's going to be a tab in the Preferences like for audio, and then you're just going to set your input and output to the interface that's plugged into the computer. And you're all set up for recording. Well, aside from some of the other essentials we're going to touch on later, of course, but that is the first important step, is getting that software open, getting your computer interface connected, and then getting your software, your DAW, to recognize that relationship and enter into it. So, sounds theological almost, doesn't it? Anyway, so thank you. I appreciate you guys hanging with me. Didn't have a lot of viewers this time around. If anybody's here and watching, do me a favor and say hello. Let me know you're here. And let me, if you're going to watch on replay, that's fine as well. Feel free to leave a comment if you have a question, and I will follow up and get to it later. That's okay that you weren't here to watch it live. I'm not offended. And one last mention of the Home Studio Producer's Guide in the link of the description of this video. It's going to save you hours of research. It's got every recommendation on any budget that I would recommend in building your first home studio, getting started, and along with links on where to purchase it. I've made this very simple for you so that you don't have to fuss with it. That was my intention all along, and I think you're going to find that that's what you're going to get out of it. So appreciate it, and also if you know somebody who would benefit from either this video or just in general the series that we're going to be doing, this page, and I do have a YouTube channel. I don't think I have a unique URL yet because I don't have enough subscribers, but if you just search South Shore Audio on YouTube, it'll come right up. Or just go to southshoreaudio.com, my website. That's my hub for everything. And there will be a link for YouTube up there as well. So thank you guys, and have a good evening. I'll plan on talking to you tomorrow. So until then, thanks a lot. Take care, guys, next time.